Next, we have consideration of an amendment to Council Action 2024A-0845, a staff direction adopted by the City Council last November related to municipal revenue. This item was on our last agenda but was postponed to today's meeting to give Councilmember Wansley, the author of the original direction, time to consider the proposed amendments. We've been able to discuss it. My amendment aimed to expand the scope, but in consultation with Councilmember Wansley, she wanted to continue with the specificity of the previous language. So we removed those strike-throughs, but are still keeping the expansion of the scope to look at alternative revenue sources. And the other piece was working with our professional staff to firm up an actual date. So we have no later than August 18th as our date on this. Is there any questions or discussion? Yes, Mr. Clerk.
Just to add maybe a little note that I know you're aware of, but for the body, this also includes our policy research team in the legislative department conducting work and research to support the Board of Estimate and Taxation. And so one of the reasons for bringing this forward is because now that we have this new resource in our department, the Board of Estimate and Taxation wanted to partner with Council to explore some of these items about additional revenue streams that could be available to local cities. And since it's our first time working with a separate elected body, I felt it was important and talked to the president about making sure that this body took official action so that we were upfront and transparent that this work is not just informing the work of this body, this elected body, but also our sister body, the Board of Estimate and Taxation, which is a separate elected body which has very specific chartered prescribed duties related to tax authority and debt for the city of Minneapolis. So I just wanted to put that on the record about this being our first attempt to work with a sister elected body through our policy and research team.
No, thank you for that additional context, and I'll also add the president of BET, President Brandt, had two priorities this term. One was expanding revenue options for the city of Minneapolis, and he got myself and the mayor both to be in shared commitment that we absolutely want to explore that, and Vice President Chugtai. And getting the Board of Estimate and Taxation staffed with full time. And so this action today is aiming to deliver on both of those priorities of the BET and making sure that we can identify those alternative sources of revenue and have that professional staff working on that. Councilmember Rainville.
Thank you. I'd like to pull items 5 and 6 on this for a separate vote. These aren't sub items. That's the language of the motion. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, I think the better approach would be if sub items 5 and 6 or items 5 and 6 upon the motion in front of you are not supported, then the better approach would be to move to strike them rather than move to separate them. They're presented as a package. So to address the package would be to amend to strike items 5 and 6 and then take up that amendment and move from that point.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. I move to strike items 5 and 6.
Is there a second?
Second.
Councilmember Wansley.
Thank you, Council President Payne. I do think it's important for the public record to state what is being proposed to be striked, which is actually pretty straightforward, and I think really concerning that we're talking about striking it, considering we just had the big horrible bill be passed nationally that literally was a handout to some of the most affluent households and interests of our country at the expense of defunding other public programs like SNAP and so many others. So I want to read the language. 5 is and requesting policy changes that will be required at the state and local level to implement a tax on the wealthiest individuals in Minneapolis through consultation with the city attorney, excluding property taxes, identify any potential revenue sources that are currently available to cities under state law. Mind you, this is also efforts that were explored by our current state legislator, where they're also looking at similar things. So we literally looked at leaders at our state legislator and say, oh, that's great. They're looking at revenue streams that also takes into into consideration our most affluent properties, households, individuals, etc., to really look at how we can continue sustaining and funding our most critical public programs. Number 6 is policy changes that would be required at the state and local level to implement a tax on the wealthiest businesses in Minneapolis. Again, something that's also being explored and have been explored at the state, as they're also having conversations around bringing revenue. So I at least wanted to share context, or at least share what's included that's being proposed to be eliminated by Councilmember Rainville, and also to encourage my colleagues to simply not support this motion. It makes no sense to not want to receive information on how we can bring in revenue and make sure that all parties, stakeholders in our city, are paying their fair share. So I would encourage my colleagues to not support this motion.
Vice President Chugtai. Oh, Councilmember Rainville. I think that was from a carryover. Vice President Chugtai.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to get in queue for this discussion to speak strongly against this amendment to strike items 5 and 6, which is exploring policies that allow us, as Councilmember Wansley outlined, implementing a tax on the wealthiest individuals and the wealthiest businesses in Minneapolis. You know, I think it is, I think I'm surprised to see this amendment come forward. It always strikes me when we're having conversations around property tax levy burden, in particular on working class homeowners, first generation homeowners in our city, homeowners in North Minneapolis in our city. You know, a property tax it came to exist as a form of a wealth tax, but we know today that's not the reality. And property taxes do inherently exist as a form of regressive taxation, where the burden felt by someone making $50,000 a year is far greater than the burden felt by someone making $500,000 a year. A progressive tax system in which we implement a tax on those who can afford it to pay their fair share, meaning the same amount of so that the cost that's being absorbed by taxpayers is greater on those who can afford it. I think that is in line with Minneapolis values. Taxing the rich, I don't think, is a controversial opinion in Minneapolis, is one that's, generally speaking, pretty widely supported in our city. And so I'm going to be voting against this amendment, and I would encourage my colleagues to do the same. Thank you, Mr. President.
Councilmember Chowdhury.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Thank you to Councilmember Wansley and President Payne for bringing this forward. I think this is very forward-thinking research to be requesting in this moment. I would also like to speak strongly against striking item number 5 and 6 that looks at how we can implement a tax on the wealthiest individuals in the city of Minneapolis. And I think it's important to center it in the context of the benefit that was given to the wealthiest in our country through the big disastrous bill that was passed through the House and Senate. Through that bill, the wealthiest individuals, the top 1%, will be getting $121 billion net tax cuts. And according to analysis from the U.S. Treasury Department, nearly 60% of the tax cuts, or about $2.5 trillion, are going to go to the top 10% of taxpayers who earn more than $228,000 annually. We need wealth distribution in our country, and our federal government is simply not going to provide for that. We know that poverty is an issue in the city of Minneapolis, and it's time that we as a council and a city start speaking with that with deep, deep clarity, and understand that speaking about poverty and addressing it and wealth distribution, when we have just concentrated it more and more over the last decades, is not political. It's a moral question, and it is very material. We have a tale of two cities in the city of Minneapolis. People are struggling every single day to feed their families, afford their health care bills, and we know it's going to get worse. And if we don't find ways to relieve tax burden on the individuals who have lower incomes and are already struggling, we are also going to see significant public safety issues. Crimes of opportunity only go up as poverty increases. And so safety, health, and having resources are things that are all connected. And we just do not have the tools before us in order to do it. And we have a lot of work to do, which includes getting this research and then working with our state legislature and earning support in order to make this a reality. And I would advise my colleagues to keep an open mind, take a step back, and really try to understand what the issue is here and not just take it as a face value and think about what the potential benefits are and be forward-looking in terms of what we need. Because local government just simply has to step up. We know that for sure for the next 4 years, and there are going to be ongoing impacts on our economy and on our people, particularly people of color and Indigenous folks in the city of Minneapolis, long after the Trump administration is done.
Councilmember Chavez.
Thank you, Council President Payne. Just for the clerks to help us with the situation, because I don't want the public to get confused. Council President Payne is bringing forward an amendment to something that was an unfinished business. Councilmember Brainville is amending that amendment. We're voting on Councilmember's amendment first. I just don't want people to get confused that Council President Payne is the one striking language, and I support the underlying motion because I believe that we do need to tax the rich. We do need to tax the wealthiest people in the city of Minneapolis if we're ever going to help address poverty in our community, period.
Councilmember Cashman.
Thank you, President Payne. This is a question for either you or Councilmember Wansley. It's really about, in items 5 and 6, what you mean by wealthiest individuals or wealthiest businesses. Is there any information from state legislators or from the BET about what qualifies as wealthiest? And my question here is really about, I think a lot of times people think that they are going to be impacted by something when they're actually not. If it's for the 1%, it's not going to impact 99% of us. And so for us to understand that we are not going to be impacted by this would be something that does impact, the folks who own large swaths of land, people who own the largest businesses in our state. And we do have billionaires in Minnesota. So I am wondering if you have any more detail about that at this time.
Did you want to speak to it?
Yeah. I just want to first take a step back. There's no impact. This is a request for information and research. So this is not an ordinance. So that is why we kept the language very high level in terms of it can include businesses. It can include households. And that's why I also asked for information around how the state has perceived or responded to this dynamic of what does wealth mean on a policy level. So we kept it high level as we do with all research requests so that we can get the broadest range of information. And then that might inform next steps that we can take that might have more of the concrete impact that I think you're getting at. But I at least wanted to start from the place of it's high level. There's currently no impacts. It's pretty broad.
I would add, I could have actually added a little bit more clarity by taking the second sentence of bullet point number 5 and just making that a separate bullet point. My original amendment was to just be inclusive of all forms of revenue, including a wealth tax. But we didn't want to lose sight of that. That's why we held it for a cycle to make sure that we were keeping the language that had already passed in this body and was already due for a report back this month, actually, originally. And it was just wanting to make sure that we were including the Board of Estimate Taxation and being very explicit about the role of that staffer is why we wanted to make this amendment. And as we were making this amendment, it was also informed by our policy and research staff that they have a very good relationship with an organization that they wanted to contract this out with. So they just wanted to make sure that there was language that didn't restrict the scope of it. So this was expanding that scope, and which was inclusive of the original language, but we just wanted to make sure we didn't strike through that original language so that as that outside firm is looking at this, they're not losing sight of the original intent here.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I'm curious to see like what those levels get defined as, because I think that people really do misunderstand the difference between $1 million and $1 billion. This isn't like a magnitude of 10. You know, this is exorbitant. And when there are people who have hundreds of millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars, that can be considered greedy or hoarding wealth, when in our city we have so many people who are living paycheck to paycheck. In Loring Park, where I live, the minimum income is like $33,000 annually. And that's not acceptable. That's not affordable. That's not sustainable. And people shouldn't be having to, you know, pay so many sales taxes and property taxes and all these other kinds of fees in our city if there are people with hundreds of millions of dollars in their pockets who could contribute a little bit more. So that's kind of what I wanted to bring up. Again, this is research, and I look forward to seeing it. I think in the context of the disastrous bill that just passed, it's really important for cities, states, and others to step up to meet our constituents' needs.
Councilmember Vita.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask my colleague, Councilmember Rainville, to consider removing the action. I think having the research done is a good idea, and just we'll get this information presented to us, Councilmember Rainville, and decisions will be made after that. I think it's totally fine for us to get the information that Councilmember Wansley is asking for, and to have it presented to the council, and decisions will be made further.
Councilmember Rainville.
I agree with you, Councilmember Vita. I do rescind my motion.
Thank you.
Councilmember Rainville has rescinded his amendment to delete items 5 and 6. So we are now on the original motion amendment that I brought forward. Councilmember Wansley. No. All right. I'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Councilmember Chowdhury.
Aye.
Councilmember Cashman.
Aye.
Councilmember Osmond.
Aye.
Councilmember Rainville.
Aye.
Councilmember Chavez.
Aye.
Councilmember Vita.
Aye.
Councilmember Wansley.
Aye.
Vice President Showtime.
Aye.
President Payne.
Aye.
There are 10 ayes.
That carries, and that motion is adopted.